Why was she the only one standing outside the hangar when the others went in? The early morning light was still thin, brushing steel across the horizon. Engines coughed awake, echoing inside the cavernous space. Pilots checked their boards, mechanics barked last-minute adjustments. Everyone seemed to belong to something, tied to a circle, a mission, a voice. But not her. She leaned against the cold frame of the hangar door, arms crossed over a chest that carried too much weight. Her name wasn't called, not on the roster, not on the orders. And yet here she was, boots laced, ready, pretending she had a place among them. Her presence was tolerated, nothing more. "Don't wait on her," one of the men muttered as he passed, helmet tucked under his arm. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't have to. She didn't react, not outwardly, but her jaw tightened. She watched him walk away, blending into the others who laughed in a circle, their voices carrying through the hangar like a language she no longer spoke. Once she had a seat at that table. Once she had a call sign painted on the nose of a bird that was hers. But war and the scars it left behind had a way of erasing names. The truth was she wasn't here on orders, not this time. She was here because of something else, something no one asked about, something she couldn't share, not yet. Her duffel bag rested against her boot. She shifted slightly, feeling the weight of it. Inside was a carefully folded photograph, edges frayed, colors fading. A face, a smile, the kind of smile that made every long night and every blood-soaked morning worth carrying through. She didn't take it out. Not here, not in the light. That photo was for the dark, for the moments when silence pressed harder than bullets ever could. "Ma'am." The voice came from her left, younger, nervous. She turned and found a private, barely 20, standing stiffly, unsure of what to do with his hands. He wasn't from her unit. She didn't have one anymore. They said you shouldn't be here." His eyes flicked away, ashamed of the message he'd been given. She studied him for a moment, then gave the faintest nod. "I know." She didn't move. The boy hesitated, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, I think they're wrong. I read about you." His cheeks colored, and he quickly stepped back, retreating into the buzz of the hangar. She let the moment hang in the air, her eyes drifting back to the horizon. The sun was higher now, bleeding pale gold across the tarmac. What they didn't know, and what she hadn't told them, was that she wasn't here for permission. She was here for closure. And closure had a way of arriving in silence, when no one else believed it mattered. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering the last briefing she had been part of. The smell of stale coffee, the scratch of pencils against paper, her voice, steady, confident, laying out the plan while a dozen others leaned in, trusting her judgment. She could still feel the weight of their eyes on her, the unspoken acknowledgement that she belonged, that she was one of them. Until she was. Until the mission that went wrong. Until the silence in her headset when she called for backup and no one answered. No one asked her what she remembered of that day. Maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they didn't care. But she remembered everything. The dust choking the valley, the sharp crack of rifles echoing against rock, the scream of rotors above, too far away to matter, and the sudden, terrifying quiet when the shooting stopped, leaving her alone among the bodies of people who should have made it back. That was the day her name started to fade, the day her legend became a shadow no one wanted to speak of. She opened her eyes again, blinking against the light. The hangar behind her was louder now. Orders barked, boots hitting concrete, the rhythmic metallic clank of weapons checked and ready. They were preparing for something big. She didn't need to ask. She could feel it in the air. And she knew somehow that she would be part of it. Not because they invited her, but because she couldn't let go. Her hand brushed the strap of her duffel. She felt the outline of the photograph through the fabric, a reminder of why she was still here, why she hadn't walked away when everyone else turned their backs. Her eyes hardened, steady now. They might ignore her. They might whisper when she passed, but she carried something none of them did, a wound that never closed, a promise that had never been broken. She straightened, pulling her shoulders back, stepping away from the hangar's edge. One of the officers glanced up as she walked in, his brow furrowed, lips parting as if to protest. But then something in her expression stopped him, something in the way she moved, quiet, resolute, untouchable. He didn't speak. She passed through the rows of machinery and men, the smell of grease and sweat mixing with jet fuel. No one stopped her. No one called her name. But their eyes followed, some curious, some resentful, some quietly respectful in ways they wouldn't admit out loud. She didn't need their permission. She had already chosen. The private from earlier watched her too, his lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to say something, anything, but the weight of the room kept him silent. She reached the far end of the hangar where the briefing screens flickered, maps bleeding with red marks and lines. A mission drawn in coordinates and code words. She studied it silently, her eyes moving over terrain she knew too well. The others might see a battlefield. She saw ghosts. A shadow passed over her face as a transport plane taxied outside, its engines rumbling deep through the floor. She stood there, the sound vibrating in her chest, and thought of the last time she had boarded one. The smell of metal, the nervous laughter of soldiers hiding fear, the way the air turned heavy with silence once the doors closed. She swallowed hard, pulling her gaze back to the map. Her heart beat slow, steady, controlled. But somewhere inside, beneath the armor she wore, something fragile stirred. A memory, a voice. "Don't promise me forever," he had said once, smiling that quiet smile. "Promise me you'll come back." She had. And she hadn't. Her eyes closed, just for a moment. The hum of the plane outside blurred into the beating of her own heart. When she opened them again, the officer was staring at her from across the room. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. His expression said it all. "You shouldn't be here." She didn't flinch, didn't move. But there was something she hadn't told him, something she hadn't told anyone. This mission, the one drawn on the screens, the one they thought belonged to them, it was hers. Not by orders, not by command, by blood, by memory, by the kind of promise that outlives the person who asked for it. She turned slightly, catching her reflection in the dark glass of the briefing screen. A face hardened by years, eyes carrying too much weight, a woman forgotten by her own but bound to something larger than herself. Her loneliness was no weakness. It was the seed of something that would outlast all of them. And though no one would say it now, one day they would whisper it. Because legends don't need orders. They are written in silence, in scars, and in the promises kept when no one is watching. Why was she watching the runway lights instead of sleeping? The night pressed in heavy, stitched with the growl of engines taking off in staggered waves. The base was never quiet, not really. Even when the radios fell silent, even when boots stopped echoing, the ghosts lingered in the air. She sat alone on the steps outside the barracks, elbows resting on her knees, chin tilted just enough to watch the sky. One plane after another climbed into the black. Their navigation lights blinked, shrinking into distance until they looked like stars. She tracked each one with her eyes, holding her breath until the faint rumble dissolved into the dark. Only then did she exhale. Once she would have been inside, strapped down, headset on, body humming with the vibration of lift. Once she would have been part of the pulse that made missions possible. Now she was just the shadow on the steps, counting them go. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her knee, nails pressing faint crescents through fabric. She wasn't here to pity herself. She wasn't built for that. But sometimes the silence bit harder than any battlefield ever had. The barracks door creaked behind her. Boots scuffed against concrete. She didn't turn. "You don't sleep much, do you?" The voice was low, careful. The young private, the one who had tried earlier to warn her off. He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. He smelled faintly of gun oil, like someone who cleaned his rifle more than he fired it. She finally spoke, her voice flat. "Sleep overrated." He chuckled nervously, shifting. "Maybe, but you look like you could use it." She glanced at him. His face was young, almost painfully so. A boy who'd been given a uniform before his bones were done growing. She wanted to tell him to go back inside to keep his innocence as long as he could. But innocence didn't last here. Not for anyone. "You got a name?" she asked. He straightened slightly, as if reporting. "Private First Class Daniels, ma'am." "Daniels?" She let it roll off her tongue. "First deployment." He nodded, tried to smile, but it faltered. "Yeah, haven't even seen combat yet. Guess that's about to change." She studied him. The way his eyes betrayed both eagerness and fear. The way he tried to hide the tremor in his hands by clenching them together. "Don't chase it," she said quietly. He frowned. "Chase what?" "The fight. It'll find you soon enough. And when it does—" her gaze drifted back to the sky, to the fatting streak of another plane. "You'll wish you'd had one more night of peace." The silence stretched. The boy swallowed, the sound small in the dark. "They say you used to fly," he said finally, almost hesitant. Her jaw tensed. She didn't answer right away. Memories surged, cockpit glass smeared with sand, the stench of smoke, the scream of alarms. She pushed them down, burying them where no one else could see. "People say a lot of things," she replied. Daniels looked at her, puzzled, but he didn't press. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees just like she had. They sat in silence, watching the runway lights blink in rhythm, two shadows sharing the same heavy air. After a while she spoke again, softer this time. "Why'd you enlist?" He blinked, surprised. He hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. "My brother, he served. Didn't make it home. Guess I thought, I don't know, maybe I'd carry the torch. Maybe I'd do what he couldn't." His voice cracked on the last word. He quickly cleared his throat, looking away, ashamed of the crack. Her chest tightened. Loss was a language she knew too well, and hearing it echoed in someone else's voice felt like a wound reopening. She wanted to tell him not to chase ghosts, not to mistake sacrifice for destiny, but she couldn't. The words stuck in her throat, tangled with her own reasons for being here. Because wasn't that why she was still here too, carrying a torch for someone who never came back? The boy didn't wait for an answer. He stood, wiping his palms against his trousers. "Anyway, I should get some rest. You should too, ma'am." She didn't reply, just watched him go, his silhouette swallowed by the barracks door. The night deepened, the sky turned colder. And still she sat. She thought of the photo folded in her bag, of the face she hadn't seen in years but couldn't erase, of the voice that lived only in memory. She thought of the silence after that last firefight, when she realized no one else was coming back. And she thought of the mission drawn on the screens earlier, the one everyone else believed was just another operation. They didn't know what waited there. She did, and she couldn't let them go blind into it. Her hand found the scar on her forearm, the one that never quite healed right, a reminder etched into skin, a story her body still carried even when no one else did. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Tomorrow, she decided, tomorrow she would make her move. Not tonight. Tonight was for silence, for memory, for the kind of resolve that hardens only when you face yourself in the dark. When the first light cracked the horizon, she was still sitting there, eyes red but steady. The base stirred awake behind her, boots, orders, metal clanking, life moving on. She stood, stretching the stiffness from her limbs. Her duffel was already packed. Today, she thought. Today it begins. The transport roared, its belly yawning open, swallowing soldiers one by one. They filed in, helmets tucked under arms, rifles slung low. Daniels was among them, his face set in a mask of determination. He didn't look her way. Maybe he didn't dare. She approached the ramp. A murmur rippled through the line as eyes turned. She wasn't on the manifest. Everyone knew it. The loadmaster blocked her path. "You're not cleared." She didn't flinch. "I'm going." The man hesitated, glancing past her as if waiting for an officer to intervene. None did. Some watched in silence. Some looked away. Her gaze didn't waver, cold, unshakable. Finally, the loadmaster shifted aside, muttering under his breath, "Your funeral." She stepped past him, the metal ramp vibrating under her boots. The air inside was thick with anticipation, fear, sweat. Soldiers filled the benches, packs between their knees. A dozen pairs of eyes followed her as she moved to the back, dropping her duffel with a dull thud. No one spoke, but the silence was louder than words. Daniel stared at the floor, jaw tight. She strapped herself in, the harness digging into her shoulders. The engines roared, shaking the world apart. And as the doors closed, sealing them in the belly of steel, she let her eyes drift shut. Her heartbeat matched the thrum of the engines, steady, relentless. Outside, the world blurred into sky. Inside, her legend began again, uninvited, unacknowledged, but inevitable. Because what no one else knew, what she hadn't told them, was that this mission wasn't about them. It was about her, and the promise she was finally ready to keep. Why was the silence louder than the engines? The transport cut through the sky, a coffin of steel and trembling bolts. Inside, bodies swayed with each dip, each shudder of turbulence. Helmets clinked, boots knocked against the floor, but no one spoke. The silence pressed down harder than the roar outside. She sat at the back, eyes half closed, listening. The hum of hydraulics, the rasp of nervous breathing, the faint rattle of loose gear, all of it stitched into a rhythm she knew too well. She could almost forget the years that separated her from this moment. Almost. Her hand rested against her duffel, fingers grazing the outline of the photograph inside. A small anchor in a storm of ghosts. She didn't take it out. Not here. Not in front of them. Legends didn't bleed in the open. Across the aisle, Daniels shifted. His knuckles were white around the strap of his rifle. He glanced her way, then quickly looked down, as if afraid of being caught starring. She remembered that look. She'd seen it in fresh recruits 100 times before, the wide eyes of someone about to meet a truth no training could prepare them for. Fear wrapped in bravado, hope tangled with dread. The plane dipped suddenly, jolting the soldiers. A curse hissed. Someone clenched their teeth. She didn't move. Her body knew how to ride the turbulence, how to let it pass through without rattling her bones. The red light above the ramp door glowed steady, waiting. She let her mind drift, not to the mission map, not to the orders she hadn't been given, but to the last time she'd been here, harnessed in the belly of a bird with men and women who trusted her. She could still hear their laughter, the off-key humming of a country song, the whispered promises of letters waiting back home. She remembered the way one of them had passed her a stick of gum, grinning like it was some sacred ritual. She had chewed it slowly, savoring the normalcy. Minutes later, half of them were gone. Her throat tightened. She opened her eyes, forcing the memory back into its cage. The red light above them blinked, then turned green. The ramp yawned open, wind screaming into the cabin. Dust and night rushed in, clawing at skin and gear. The world tilted, engines straining to hold steady against unseen currents. Go, go, go. One by one they moved, packs slammed, boots thundered across metal, shadows leapt into the darkness. She rose without hesitation. The wind tore at her, whipping hair loose from its tie. The night was a gaping mouth, ready to swallow them whole. And still she stepped forward. The drop seized her body, ripping the breath from her lungs. Air punched past her ears. Her chest pressed tight against the harness. The ground was a blur of shadow and faint moonlight. She counted 1, 2, 3. The chute snapped open. Her body jerked, slamming into stillness. She hung in the sky, swaying, heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. Below, the land stretched endless and harsh, jagged ridges, scars of rock and sand, a place that remembered death, a place that still carried the echoes of the last mission that broke her. Her stomach clenched, she forced herself to breathe, in, out, steady. Other canopies bloomed around her, white ghosts against the dark, shadows drifting silently to earth. Daniel's was 2 lines away, his chute fully open, legs kicking awkwardly as he tried to control his descent. She tracked him with her eyes, ready for the panic she knew would come. But he managed, somehow. The ground surged closer, fast. She braced, knees bent, shoulders tight. The impact rattled through her body, a blunt punch that drove the air from her lungs. She rolled, sand scraping skin, gear digging into bone. Silence. Then voices, low, urgent, orders whispered in the dark, shapes gathering gear, checking weapons, signaling with gloved hands. She pushed herself up, dust falling from her uniform. Her knees screamed, old injuries reminding her they'd never truly healed. But she ignored the pain. Pain was just another language her body spoke. The squad moved quickly, forming a loose perimeter, shadows shifting against shadows. "Rally," someone hissed. Daniel stumbled toward the group, wide-eyed, rifle shaking slightly in his hands. She caught his shoulder as he passed, steadying him without a word. His eyes met hers. Gratitude flickered there, then fear, then something unspoken, a question he didn't dare voice. She let go. The squad pressed forward, boots crunching over gravel and dust. The night swallowed their movements, leaving only the faint hiss of breath and the muted clink of gear. She stayed near the back, eyes scanning the ridges. Every shadow looked like a memory. Every rock felt like a grave marker. The terrain was cruel, sharp, silent. It whispered of past blood, of promises broken. Her chest tightened again. She knew this place too well. It was the same valley where her last mission had bled out. She hadn't told them that, not yet. The squad halted at the base of a ridge. The leader, a captain with lines of exhaustion carved into his face, signaled for a short hold. The men crouched, rifles up, scanning the dark. She stayed standing, eyes fixed on the horizon. The captain noticed her. His jaw tightened. He started toward her, movements sharp, angry. "You're not supposed to be here," he hissed, voice low but hard. "Who the hell cleared you?" Her gaze didn't shift from the ridge. "Does it matter?" "It does if you compromise my men." Finally she looked at him. Her eyes were cold, ancient. "If I compromise them, you'll be the first to know." His teeth clenched. He wanted to throw her out, she could see it. But the silence of the valley pressed in, and even his pride bent beneath its weight. He muttered something under his breath, then turned away. She exhaled slowly. Daniels glanced at her from the side, his expression caught between awe and fear. The squad moved again, climbing the ridge, their breaths growing heavier, boots sliding on loose stone. The air thinned, sharp against their lungs. At the top, the land stretched before them, an endless expanse of jagged earth and shadow. She froze. Her chest went hollow. Her hands trembled, just slightly, almost invisible. Because she remembered this view. She remembered standing here once before, watching her unit descend into the valley below. She remembered the radio static, the first crack of gunfire, the way the earth erupted with chaos. And she remembered the silence afterward. Her vision blurred. For a heartbeat, she wasn't here. She was back there, standing in the wreckage of trust, counting bodies that should have made it home. She blinked hard, forcing the memory back. Daniel's voice broke the silence, a whisper, "Ma'am, you okay?" She didn't answer, not yet. Because there was something she hadn't told them. The enemy they thought they were here to face. She knew them, knew their patterns, their cruelty, their patience. She had survived them once, barely. And now they were walking into the same storm. Only this time, She wasn't just a soldier following orders. She was a ghost with unfinished business. And ghosts don't run. Why did the night suddenly feel alive? The squad crouched low along the ridge, their breaths sharp and controlled. The valley stretched before them, a dark ocean of stone and sand. At first it seemed empty, too empty. Then faint glimmers, dull orange dots scattered far below, fires, small, controlled, human. They weren't alone. The captain signaled for silence, his hand raised, fingers spread. Every rifle lifted, scopes tightening against shoulders. The men scanned the darkness, searching for shapes that didn't belong. Her heart slowed. She knew what was coming. The quiet before the storm was a sound she carried in her bones. She felt it now, crawling across her skin, pressing behind her ears. Daniels was next to her. She could feel him shaking, even in the shadows. His knuckles strained against his rifle grip, the barrel twitching as he tried to hold it steady. His breath came quick, shallow. "Breathe," she whispered, so low only he could hear. His head jerked toward her. His eyes were wide, panicked. "Breathe slow," she repeated, her own inhale and exhale steady, deliberate, like a drumbeat in the dark. He tried, the tremor eased just slightly. Then it began. A crack split the night, sharp, clean, a rifle shot. Stone shattered near the captain's boots. He cursed, diving low. The valley exploded in sound. Muzzles flared below, fire spitting from the darkness. Bullets tore upward, whining past ears, chipping rock. The air stank of dust and cordite, sharp in the throat. The squad scattered along the ridge, dropping behind cover, rifles barking in return. She moved without thought. The body remembered what the mind tried to bury. She slid behind a jagged rock, rifle raised, scope cutting the night. Shapes flickered below, shadows darting between firelight, too many, more than the map had promised, more than the squad expected. Her gut twisted. She knew this tactic, the bait of small fires, the patience to wait until the ridge was full, then the sudden storm. She had seen it before, survived it once, barely. Her scope found one of them, silhouette against flame. She didn't hesitate. One squeeze. The rifle cracked, recoil kissing her shoulder. The shadow dropped. But for everyone that fell, 3 more rose. The captain's voice hissed through the comms, sharp, rattled. "Hold the line, do not break." Bullets shrieked past. Sparks danced off rock. Dust filled her mouth, coating her tongue with grit and iron. Daniels fired blindly beside her, each shot wild. His face was pale, eyes frantic. She grabbed his rifle barrel, forcing it down. "Aim, don't waste it." "I can't," his voice cracked. "You can." Her tone cut sharp, commanding. "Breathe, find one, take it." He swallowed hard, nodding, forcing himself to aim again. His breath hitched, then steadied. The next shot found its mark. The shadow collapsed. She gave a small nod. Not approval, not comfort, just acknowledgement. Then turned back to her own scope. The squad held, but barely. They were pinned, outnumbered, every shot answered with 3 more. And still she moved like stone. No hesitation, no panic. Her body was machine, but her mind burned. Because this was the valley, the same one. The same rocks, the same firelight, the same enemy waiting like wolves. She had promised herself she would never stand here again. And yet, here she was. Another bullet sparked inches from her head. She flinched, teeth clenched, heart slamming. Her scars screamed. Her chest felt tight, memory pressing through skin. For a split second, the battlefield blurred. She saw them, her old unit. Faces half-lit by fire, shouting, fighting, falling. She heard the silence after, the silence that swallowed their names. Her stomach lurched. She almost lost her grip. Almost. But she forced the vision back, pressing it deep. She couldn't break. Not here, not again. The captain's voice snapped over comms, desperate now. "We're cut off. They'll overrun us if we stay." Options narrowed, retreat or die. He started signaling fallback positions, his hands quick, sharp. But she shook her head. She knew what he didn't. The fallback path, they'd already closed it. She could see it in the way the enemy moved, circling, waiting to drive them into the trap. "No," she said low but fierce. The captain whipped his head toward her. "What?" "They're hurting you," she snapped. "You pull back, you're walking into a kill box." His face hardened. "You don't give the orders here." "I'm not giving orders." Her eyes locked on his steel. "I'm telling you what's coming." Another volley tore overhead, spraying sparks. Men shouted, one cried out, hit in the leg. The captain cursed, torn. She leaned closer, her voice like a blade. "I've been here before. Do what you want, but if you retreat, you bury them all." Silence stretched between them, carved by gunfire. Finally, his jaw clenched. He didn't like it, didn't want it, but he didn't argue again. "Hold position," he barked. The squad dug in. Weapons barked, shadows fell, but they were running dry. Ammo clips clattered to the ground, empty. Every reload felt like borrowed time. Daniel's rifle clicked empty. He swore, fumbling for another mag. His hands shook too hard. Without a word, she passed him one of hers. Their eyes met. His were wide, desperate. Hers were steady, hollow. The boy lived another minute because of it. And in war, sometimes a minute was the difference between legend and silence. The firefight dragged, relentless. The ridge reeked of smoke, sweat, blood. Someone screamed, then fell silent. Another soldier clutched his shoulder, teeth gritted against pain. The captain's voice rasped over comms. "We can't hold much longer." Her eyes swept the valley, searching, hunting. There, a cluster of shadows different from the rest, coordinating, signaling. Leaders, cut them and the line might break. Her heart hammered, her breath steadied. She slid into position, rifle angled, scope fixed. The world narrowed to a tunnel. Just her, the trigger, the heartbeat in her ears. She fired 1, 2, 3, each shot clean, each shadow fell. For a moment, just a moment, the valley stuttered. The enemy fire faltered, disoriented. The squad seized it. A surge of return fire, a push back, a gasp of breathing space. But it wouldn't last, she knew it. They'd regroup. They always did. The captain turned to her, sweat streaking his face. "How the hell did you?" She cut him off, voice cold. "Because I've been here before." He stared at her, shock, confusion, maybe even fear. But she was already turning back to the valley. Because she knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. And deep down, beneath the steel of her voice, a truth gnawed at her ribs. She hadn't come here just to fight. She had come here to finish what was left undone. And finishing meant walking straight into the place she swore she'd never return to. The place where her promise still lay buried. The ridge shook with gunfire, with fear, with defiance. But inside her chest, a different sound rose. The quiet echo of a voice she couldn't forget. "Promise me you'll come back." She whispered into the night, unheard by anyone but herself. "I'm trying." The valley had gone quiet. Too quiet. Smoke drifted across the ridge like a heavy curtain, stinging eyes and throats. The last gunshot still seemed to echo in the rocks, though no fresh fire came from below. Only silence. Silence and the groans of the wounded. The squad crouched low, breathless, trembling. Some clutched bleeding arms or shoulders, others stared hollow-eyed at the ground. Dust and sweat clung to every face, mixing with streaks of blood that wasn't always their own. They had survived, barely. The captain stood slowly, his hand braced against the ridge stone, his chest rising hard beneath the weight of his gear. He scanned the valley below, jaw clenched, eyes still sharp. He didn't trust this quiet. Neither did she. Her rifle rested against her chest, barrel still warm. Her hands shook just faintly, though her face remained stone. She knew the stillness that followed a first wave. She knew what waited in it. Daniels collapsed beside her, gasping, his helmet tilted back. His face was pale, streaked with grime. His hands still trembled, but his eyes burned with something new. Not just fear, something closer to resolve. I got two, he whispered, like he wasn't sure if it counted. She didn't look at him, didn't answer, just stared into the valley, her lips pressed thin. Daniel swallowed, voice cracking. Did you see them? Did you see me hit? Finally, she glanced his way. His chest rose like he was waiting for her judgment, needing it like air. She gave the smallest nod, barely a movement, but his shoulders eased and he closed his eyes for a moment, as if the simple acknowledgement was enough to anchor him. Not comfort, not praise, just truth, and for him that was something. The captain barked for medics. Two men scrambled to patch wounds, pressing gauze against bleeding legs and shoulders. One soldier lay too still, his helmet tilted at an unnatural angle. His name had already become silence. The captain's voice cut through the air, rough. Count your ammo, check your wounded. We're not moving until we're ready. The squad obeyed, weary hands fumbling with half-empty magazines. Some had only a few rounds left, others had less. The captain turned then, eyes falling on her. She felt it before she saw it, the weight of his stare. You, he said, voice low but sharp. Her gaze slid toward him, calm, steady. You knew, he said, not a question, a statement edged with accusation. You knew they were waiting, you knew the fallback was a trap. She didn't answer. He stepped closer, his boots crunching against stone. Who the hell are you? You're no rookie, no transfer. What are you doing here? His voice drew eyes. The squad turned one by one, gazes sharpening on her, some curious, some doubtful, some afraid. She felt it, the shift, the air growing heavy with unasked questions. Her throat tightened. For a moment she said nothing. Then I was a soldier, once. The captain's eyes narrowed. That's not an answer. She looked away, back to the valley. Smoke still curled from the fires below, flickering orange like wounds that refused to close. Finally her voice came low. I buried a promise here, that's why I'm back. The words hung in the air, cold, heavy. No one dared break them. The captain studied her, his jaw flexing. He wanted more, demanded more, but something in her tone, the weight of it, stilled his questions, at least for now. She could feel Daniel starring. His eyes burned holes into her side, wide with confusion, with awe, with fear. The captain growled, turning away. Fine, keep your secrets, but understand this. His voice hardened, steel biting through exhaustion. Out here, every man and woman under my command lives or dies together. If you've got knowledge that saves us, you share it. No riddles, no ghosts, clear. Her eyes locked on his back. She didn't answer. Clear, he snapped, spinning toward her again. Slowly she gave a single nod, nothing more. The tension lingered like a storm cloud. The squad shifted, unease running through them. They didn't understand her, didn't trust her, but they couldn't deny what they'd seen, her steadiness, her kills, the way she'd read the enemy before anyone else. Daniels finally broke the silence, his voice small but steady. She saved us, if she hadn't. She isn't in command, the captain cut in sharp. Daniels flinched, lips snapping shut. The quiet grew heavy again. The squad returned to their checks, but their eyes still flickered toward her, restless, wary. She knelt, sliding a hand over her pack. Her fingers brushed cold steel, an old knife, worn smooth by years, the handle wrapped in dark cloth. She gripped it tight, grounding herself, then let it fall back into the pack. Her scars itched. Beneath the grime and sweat, they burned, as if the valley itself remembered them. She closed her eyes just for a moment, and the voices came. Shouts, screams, gunfire, the thunder of collapse. And one voice clearer than all the rest. Promise me you'll come back. Her chest tightened. She pressed a hand against her ribs as if she could still the echo. When she opened her eyes, Daniels was watching her. His mouth opened like he wanted to ask, but he stopped himself. The captain called again, breaking the moment. We move at first light. The squad groaned, weary, but no one argued. First light. That meant hours here, on this ridge in the smoke and silence. Hours where the enemy could regroup. Hours where memory would gnaw at her bones. She didn't like it, but she said nothing. The men settled, some collapsing against rocks, others forcing food down dry throats. The medics worked by dim lamps, hands stained red. She sat apart, rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the valley, watching, waiting, listening. Daniels shuffled closer, hesitating before sitting beside her. His voice was low, careful. "When you said you buried a promise here," he swallowed, "what did you mean?" Her grip on the rifle tightened. He waited, hopeful, curious. But she only shook her head. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to." Daniels frowned but said nothing more. He sat with her in silence, his presence awkward but stubborn. Hours crawled, the fires below dimmed, shadows shifted, the night grew colder. And still her scars burned. She knew this was only the beginning. The enemy would come again, stronger, hungrier, and when they did, the squad would be tested. But deeper still, she knew another truth. This valley wasn't just another battlefield. It was her graveyard. And soon it would demand its due. The night refused to sleep. Shadows clung to the valley like ink, swallowing shapes until nothing moved but smoke. The squad huddled close to the ridge, gear piled, rifles within reach. Every cough, every scrape of boot against stone sounded too loud, too dangerous. She sat awake, unmoving, her back pressed against cold rock, eyes half-lidded but sharp. She had learned long ago, the quiet before dawn was never safe. The dark always carried teeth. Daniels lay nearby, restless. He shifted, muttered in dreams, clenched his fists like a boy fighting phantoms. Once he whispered a name, a girl's name. The syllables cracked in his throat like glass. She turned her head slightly, studying him. Even in sleep, the young carried their wars. The captain, however, did not sleep. He paced, slow and measured like a caged animal. His silhouette cut against the pale light of the moon. At times he stopped, staring down the valley, lips pressed thin, as if searching for the enemy with his will alone. At one point he caught her watching. Their eyes locked in the dark. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But the message passed between them, unwanted trust, unwilling recognition. Both knew dawn would test them in ways words could not. The hours dragged, cold seeped into bone. The air itself seemed to whisper. At last Daniel stirred awake. He rubbed his eyes, breath clouding in the night. Then, hesitantly, he asked the question he'd carried since evening. "Was it someone you lost, the promise?" Her hand stilled over the rifle. Daniel's voice was almost a whisper. I heard you earlier. You said you buried one here, a promise." The weight of silence pressed against her ribs. She wanted to push him away, to shut him down. But the night had a way of loosening guarded tongues, and part of her, just a sliver, wanted him to know. Once, she murmured, eyes on the valley, "There was a man, my brother." Daniels blinked. He was all I had left, and he believed in something bigger, bigger than me, bigger than both of us. She swallowed. The taste of iron touched her tongue, memory clawing at her chest. "They sent us here years ago, this valley. It was supposed to be routine. It was. He never made it out." Her fingers brushed the scars along her side. The skin burned, alive with ghosts. "I promised him," she whispered. "I promised I'd finish what he started, that his fight wouldn't die here with him." Daniel sat silent, wide-eyed, the words sinking into him like stones in water. The night wind shifted. A crack echoed across the valley. Both of them froze. Not gunfire, not exactly, but something metallic, something deliberate. The captain's head snapped toward the sound. "Positions," he hissed. The squad jolted awake, scrambling, weapons clattering softly. Hearts hammered loud enough to be heard. They crouched low, scanning the darkness. Silence followed, heavy, watching. But she knew. Her breath caught, the chill running deeper than cold. "They're moving," she whispered. The captain glanced her way. She met his stare, steady, certain. They're not waiting for dawn, they're probing, testing. And then the valley exploded. Gunfire ripped from the shadows. Muzzle flashes sparked like lightning, sudden and brutal. Bullets chewed stone, kicking sparks into the air. The squad ducked, shouting, returning fire blind into black. She rolled against the ridge, rifle braced, eyes narrowing. Through the chaos she saw it movement, too coordinated, too precise. The enemy wasn't rushing. They were advancing with discipline, leapfrogging in teams, suppressing, forcing the squad into panic. Her pulse steadied, her breath slowed. Crack, one target down. Crack, another, falling silent in the dark. The captain shouted orders, his voice cutting through fear. Men scrambled to follow, but the enemy's fire was heavier, stronger, closer. Daniels fired wildly, teeth clenched, eyes wide. His shots went high, useless. She grabbed his barrel, yanking it down. "Slow," she hissed. "Breathe, you miss, you waste, again." He blinked at her, chest heaving, then forced himself steady, took aim, fired, and this time the shadow crumpled. The battle raged, minutes stretched endless. The squad bled, the rocks shattered, the dark screamed. But slowly, surely, the enemy began to pull back. Fewer flashes, fewer rounds, until only silence remained. The squad gasped, trembling, shoulders sagging. Sweat dripped into eyes, blood into dust. Daniels collapsed beside her, chest heaving. Was that it? Was that? No, her voice cut flat. She scanned the valley, her gut twisting. That wasn't an assault, that was a rehearsal. The captain overheard, his face hardened. They were measuring us. She nodded once. And in that moment, no one doubted her anymore, not even him. The squad shifted uneasily, realization dawning. If that wasn't their full weight, then dawn would bring hell itself. The captain exhaled slowly, staring into black. "We won't survive another wave like that." Silence. The men lowered their eyes, fear crawling back in. Then she spoke, quiet, certain. "We don't need to survive it, we need to break it." The captain turned to her. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Her gaze never left the valley. The scars along her side throbbed. The memory of her brother's last breath burned hot. "We lure them," she said. "We give them exactly what they think they want, and when they reach for it," her hand clenched into a fist, "we crush them." The captain studied her, searching her face, for lies, for madness, for anything that would give him reason to reject her. But he saw only fire. And maybe, just maybe, something he could follow. He gave a slow nod. "At first light, we set the trap." Why did the dawn feel like a held breath? Light crept like a slow wound across the valley, gray at first, then thin gold, then a hard, clear sun that stripped the shadows bare. The ridge that had held them through the night was a ridge of ghosts now, faces drawn, uniforms stiff, eyes rimmed with red. Every movement was careful, every noise measured. She moved like she'd practiced this 1,000 times, though in truth she'd only rehearsed it in memory. Maps folded under the weight of regret, coordinates traced by fingertip, plans whispered into the dark to steady herself. The squad watched her, not with blind faith but with something more fragile, a tentative trust born from smoke and saved minutes. Daniels rubbed at his jaw, trying to steady his hands. The captain paced, jaw clenched, a man counting the cost of the next gamble. They split into teams by her direction, small, efficient units placed to look like a scatter of prey. Fires were left deliberately small, almost pathetic, smoke curling up in skinny lines like false beacons. A few caches of gear were abandoned, obviously staged. The captain's men moved like actors on cue, breathing heavy, playing frightened. It made her stomach twist to watch them pretend to be less prepared than they were. Pretending could be lethal. Pretending could save lives. She stood where she could see the valley's throat. Her hands hovered over the radio, over the knife she'd wrapped in cloth years ago, over the old folded photo tucked in the inner sleeve of her jacket. She drew courage from small things. the rustle of her own breath, the memory of a laugh that shouldn't have belonged to a battlefield, the way a wrist felt against hers when someone dared to reach across the edge of grief. "On my mark," she whispered, though the men around her heard nothing. It was a rhythm she kept, one small command given only to herself. The enemy came like first warm rain, slow, then sudden, then everywhere. At first they sent scouts, then handlers, then young fighters in ragged uniforms, eyes bright with hatred and hunger and the odd, cruel thrill of a fight. They moved with confidence into the bait, boots stirring dust, rifles loose. They laughed, the sound brittle and young, their arrogance bleeding into the morning. They thought it an easy harvest. She watched them approach the staged fires. She watched a small squad of them break tendency and go low, sweeping across the valley floor, their silhouettes sharp against the light. They looked like winners already. She bit down on the inside of her cheek until iron tasted on her tongue. The trap had to feel right, real, vulnerable, the kind that pulls a predator closer because it smells an easy kill. The captain's unit hung back, rifles poised. Daniels crouched low, eyes wide but steady now. He had learned something during the night, how to breathe when the world expected you to scream. He glanced at her once, then back to the valley. Their eyes met for a bare second, a private exchange. Do this and come back. And then it began. The first fighters hit the fake caches. They grabbed what looked valuable, ammo, rations, radios. They cheered with small, savage triumphs. A celebratory cigarette passed between two of them, smoke unfurled, stupid and human. They didn't notice the small sensors, trip lines hidden beneath dust, the microphones placed to catch their chatter, the decoys rigged to draw them into zones. They took what was offered like children taking candy. She listened as the captain's men held their breath, waiting. The valley seemed to hold its own breath too, as if the earth itself knew the stakes. Her hand tightened around her weapon. Signals moved through the radio, thin sounds. The enemy's laughter threaded with exultation. Then one of their voices, a leader, gave an order that sounded like arrogance, a command to secure the perimeter. He didn't expect the reply that came from the hidden microphone. It was garbled, true, but enough to make him pause, the sound of extra boots, the rumble of unseen support. His eyes tightened. He called for caution. Too late. She hit the switch. Not all at once. Not like a switch from death to life, but like the slow opening of an iris. First, a distant flare, flashpots set among the stones to blind and disorient. Then the planted explosives cut a line behind the enemy, isolating them from their retreat. The valley answered with the thunder of controlled detonations, and fear spread fast. For a moment the enemy faltered, then regrouped, anger replacing confusion. The captain's signal followed her action, small, sharp commands. Men unfolded from cover in practiced motion. They closed in like a noose. The enemy morphed from hunters to hunted, surprised and sloppy under the pressure. Bullets began to bite at stone and shouts echoed. The valley that had smelled of smoke all night now smelled of something else. Burnt rubber, scorched cloth, a metallic tang that set teeth on edge. Men fell. Screams rose. The tide had turned, but it was ugly and costly. She moved with them, every step a negotiation with memory. When she fired, it was precise, clinical. Her shots were not theatrical. They were the economy of survival, one shot, one threat neutralized. She watched a fighter fall and felt nothing but the heat of efficiency. Later, she knew those faces would come back to her, not as enemies but as human failures, young men who had been taught to hate rather than to hope. For now, there was no time for pity. There was only the hard geometry of the fight. Daniels fought like a different man. He ducked, rolled, and when a young fighter lunged at him, Daniels met him with a discipline that had not belonged to him before the night. Daniels' hands trembled, then steadied. He shot. The enemy slumped. Daniels exhaled like someone born again. She had handed him not just ammo, but a small key to himself. That key had turned in the lock. The captain's voice cracked over the comms, pain, relief, fury braided together. Hold the flank, push, secure the ridge. They did. The enemy broke in places, regrouped in others. It was a messy victory, as all real ones were. Someone chewed a last cigarette, laughing like a man who'd been visited by ghost luck. Another man sobbed, his shoulder a ragged ruin. In the middle of it, under a sun that had climbed higher like an unforgiving judge, she found something. A small crumpled piece of cloth snagged on a thorn bush near the line where the enemy had faltered. It was dirty, soaked in sweat in the dark of too many nights, but she knew the pattern. She knew the cut of the fabric. Her pulse stuttered. Her hands moved without permission. She reached, plucked the scrap free, and unfolded it with shaking fingers. It was a torn corner of a uniform. Not theirs. Not enemy's regular issue. It was a patch, half-burnt, one she had seen before in a flash of memory, the insignia of the unit her brother had been with, the one that had been at the heart of the mission that went wrong. For a moment the valley withdrew, and the world narrowed to the scrap in her hands. The noise became distant, muffled, like a radio tuned poorly. Her breath left her. The photo she kept folded against her bones felt too heavy to touch. The scar along her side burned as if memory were a live wire. He had been here, he had been close, and something of him lay literally within reach. The captain stumbled toward her, eyes bright with the hard light of combat. "What is it?" he barked, scanning her face. He wanted answers, orders, a soldier's logic. She met his gaze, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed the rawness through. "This," she said, holding up the cloth, "this is why I came." His face closed like a book. He didn't soften. He only frowned, understanding layering over confusion. "You knew what you were looking for." "I knew," she said, voice small but steady, "that some threads never break, that bodies leave traces, that promises rot if you don't root them out." Daniels came close, peering over her shoulder. Recognition flitted through his features, like seeing a photograph of someone you'd only heard about. He said nothing, only reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and small. They pushed the enemy back till the valley was a scatter of wounded and retreating fighters. The day belonged to them, but the price sat like a stone in the middle of her chest. Men who had laughed an hour ago now lay silent. Some lives had been traded for a tactical victory. The captain counted the cost aloud, his voice flat. They had lost 3 men, busted hands, a leg, 2 new scars that would later become stories. She let the tally go through her like a blade. Each name that the captain spoke landed in her gut like a small stone. She answered nothing when he asked if she was satisfied. Satisfaction lived in kitchens and at dinner tables, not in valleys. What she felt was a hollowing, an old promise loosening its grip, pieces finally sliding free. After the last of the enemy drifted away, after the medics wrapped the worst wounds and the dead were covered with blankets like folded pages, she sat on a rock and let the valley speak to her. It said nothing but the wind and the rustle of supplies. She trembled, and then she let herself fold. Not weakness, release. For once she could name the thing she'd been carrying. Not as a rumor but tangible, a frayed edge of her brother's life, found in a patch of cloth and a smell of burnt coffee. Daniels came and sat beside her without a word. He handed her a canteen. She drank, the water cool and sterile, and tasted nothing. He'd seen something in her face he hadn't before, an unfinished ledger finally given the start of an accounting. Under the sharp sky, she folded the scrap and tucked it back into the inner sleeve of her jacket. It felt like adding weight to a ledger that finally tilted. She would follow that thread. She would pull at it until whatever secrets were binding her brother to that valley gave way. The captain walked by, his step heavy. He paused, and for a second their eyes met. He didn't ask for explanations now. He didn't need to. A soldier's respect is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a look that says, "I saw you fight, I saw you break and keep going." A gust of wind lifted the dust, and for an instant she imagined she could hear voices, faint, like distant radios, threads of the past woven into the present. She pressed her palm over her heart as if to keep those voices there. They would move on. Orders would come. There was more to do, more to uncover, more to survive. But for the first time since she stepped into the hangar that morning, the hollow in her chest felt less like a cavern and more like a room with a door she could step through. She looked at Daniels and offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile. He returned it, weary and bright as dawn itself. They lined up, counted their dead, loaded what they could salvage. The valley behind them was a scar with a story to tell. The valley ahead was a map she would read until the ink bled truth. She rose, shoulders squared, feeling the weight of the cloth in her jacket. The day had cost them dearly. It had also given her a thread, a starting point, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, some promises could be kept. She walked forward with her squad, and the sun caught the edge of her face like a blade, sharp, honest, and dangerous in its clarity. Why was her name still spoken in whispers long after the dust had settled? Some called her a ghost. Some said she had simply disappeared into the silence she carried her whole life. But those who knew, those who saw, never forgot. She had no medals, no grand speeches, no parades. Only a record written in scars, in silence, in the lives she touched when she thought she had none left to give. She had walked into war not for glory, but because she had nothing else, and somehow that emptiness became her strength. The men who served beside her never quite agreed on how to describe her. One said she was colder than the night deserts, until he caught her quietly fixing a letter another soldier couldn't find the words to finish. Another swore she never flinched, never broke, until he saw her pause on a rooftop when a lullaby floated from a broken window, the sound of a mother trying to comfort her child. She had lowered her rifle, just for a moment, long enough for everyone to remember she wasn't a machine. And yet every mission she touched turned, not because she was invincible, but because she refused to stop. When her lungs burned, when her heart bled, when the weight of every decision pressed down, she kept moving. Not fast, not loud, just steady. That was her gift, steadiness. Some said she vanished after her last mission, choosing exile over the hollow praise of politics. Others whispered that she walked among civilians now, unknown, unnoticed, blending back into the very world that once ignored her. But the legend remained, not because she wanted it to, but because people need stories like hers, stories of quiet strength, of dignity unspoken. Her loneliness became a compass, her silence a shield, her resilience a mirror for those who doubted their own worth. Sometimes she reminded them, greatness doesn't roar, it endures. And maybe that's why her story survived, passed from soldier to soldier, from one weary heart to another. Not for the missions, not for the battles, but for the proof that a single person carrying their grief, their scars, their stubborn will, could stand against the storm. In the end, she didn't need statues or monuments. She didn't need a name etched in stone. Her legend lived where it mattered most, in the pauses between gunfire, in the silence after loss, in the hope someone carried into the next day. She faced the world alone, and in that solitude she left behind something larger than herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that silence she became eternal.